On Monday, we're not going to talk about your Grapes of Wrath essay, so that'll be a nice one-day break, and then we'll probably come back to it on Tuesday. What we're going to go over essay prompt notes. We went through your thesis statement yesterday, so we'll recap some stuff. I have one more thing I want to show you, and we'll use Chapter 5 as a basis for that. Bethany's going to do her Google Classroom survey.
I did it.
She did it, so there, you don't have to worry about that. Everyone's done it. Yay. And so then for next week, what we'd be taking a look at, really the two assignments at this point would be Bedford Reader. You're going to read I Have a Dream. Remember, no quiz for that for Wednesday. And then on Thursday of next week, you're going to come in with a paper copy of your rough draft for the Grapes of Wrath. So again, the hope is, at least at this point, that now you have a better idea of what it is, the topic-wise, you can kind of choose for the essay. And now, after hopefully yesterday with doing the SPA, we got a better sense as to how you would be setting up your thesis statement. So quick little recap with a couple things. When it comes to strategies, which one are you specifically not going to use? You're not going to use figurative language, but you can use anything that falls underneath that umbrella of figurative language. So all 3 body paragraphs could, in fact, be, figurative language. And my guess is that diction will probably be a common one that a lot of folks would use, which is perfectly fine. And if you use any kind of diction, just make sure you put an adjective in front of the term diction. All right, so you have some kind of description for it. And I think I also said you can't go to that well more than once. You're not going to have a paragraph about patriotic diction, then another paragraph about demeaning diction. You just pick one kind of diction that you would go with if in fact you decide to use that.
I like the details are the ones that are going to be overused.
Details are the ones that kind of have the potential to be overused. I mean, there are definitely details in here that can be done. And Chapter 5 is going to be a great example of that we'll take a look at. My concern with details is it tends to be one when you deal with fiction, so novels and short stories, that someone will read, a passage and go, I don't know what that category falls in. I'll call it a detail.
Yeah.
So if, and this will hold true with any technique that you do on Thursday, one of the things that we'll do with your edit on draft check is make sure that the stuff that you do have does in fact support the device that you're using. How many examples do you need in each paragraph? You need 3. That doesn't necessarily mean you need 3 metaphors, or 3 examples of diction, or 3 examples of imagery. Can you think of a situation where you might only use 2 examples of metaphor, but what that 3rd example would be?
Could it reinforce your statement?
That's what statement we're talking about.
The statement of like if it was Steinbeck uses I don't know, some form of diction to enforce something. Yeah.
Talking about that?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're validating the argument. So, and this is going to vary so much from essay to essay, and this is where, you folks get frustrated. Well, what do you want me to do? Well, I want you to write, and then we just kind of see where it goes from there. It's still a crapshoot at this point. But what I don't want you to do is I don't want Kate to go, this is a metaphor. This metaphor represents blah, 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 blah. And now this is also a metaphor, because it's going to kind of start to sound like there's 3 little mini paragraphs in one paragraph. The hope, and this takes time, it's not something that's just going to, for most people at least it takes time, it's not something that's just going to magically appear. You want there to be continuity, transition from one example into the next. So as you're moving from example to example, one of those examples, one of those quotes, it might be something that is validating how there is a spread of socialistic thought. One thing that helps advance this idea of socialistic thought, or whatever example you end up going with, could be now moving into one of your examples. So it's going to take some time. I realize it's going to take you time. You don't always realize it's going to take time in August and September, but don't feel like you have to have 3 little mini paragraphs about imagery squished into one. You want those examples to kind of feed off one another and work together. One thing that I think a lot of people tend to do at the beginning of the year is probably overquote, bless you. Don't feel like you have to quote a whole entire page for one example of imagery. Blend it into your own writing. You don't want your paragraph to turn into Steinbeck with a little bit of Wells surrounding it. So if you're a block quote fan, where you do that double indent thing, I would try to start to maybe ease off that a little bit so that you can get more Sam, more Anna, more Maria into the essay, as opposed to time back. Any questions about swallows and all that kind of stuff? This gets easier to talk about after you've written it. And that's why, again, you're doing a rough draft. Because, Sam, what did you struggle on? Oh, I don't know. I didn't do it yet. By Thursday, you know what you struggled on. Any questions about swallow? Or thesis statements or anything like that? All right. One more acronym for the day, for the week. What's the next one? Fourth period was shouting them out because they were reading their course syllabus, I think. They were fancy. You don't want to be that person, Sam, who takes out the course syllabus after I suggest it because it looks like a brown noser.
Kiss butt. If I could have helpful things to write down.
SOAPSTone. Or SOAPSTone. But we say SOAPSTone. SOAPSTone is speaker, occasion, which I misspell half the time, audience, purpose. That should sound familiar. Where did we have purpose? And it's still a one-word verb in here, so that's kind of nice. Subject. And tone stands for tone. 7:45, he's already on. You know, Sam described himself as hot, Katie, in the student survey.
I did too.
3 words.
I said
No, he said
handsome.
handsome.
Oh man.
I was more
Handsome
respectful
and hot?
about it.
No, well, handsome and hot. He like doubled up.
Oh, double whammy.
Oh, it could represent my temper.
But did it though?
I realized I haven't made like one disparaging comment about Canada yet.
What?
Were you supposed to?
It's in the course syllabus.
Is someone from Canada in here?
With your sister, I would always talk bad
I'm
things about Canada.
Canadian.
Yeah.
Wait, what?
They don't know this?
I am.
She's from Canada.
I don't like to put on blast the Canadian.
She's from Canada. It's
You ever watch
she's a
that?
Canadian, so you're from Canada. It's not Canada.
Yes.
Get that thought out of your mind, Kate.
I mean, you can also make fun of like the rest of. You can like make like Swedish jokes, German jokes.
Why are you making fun of my heritage?
See? Yes.
Why do you have to go there?
That's what I said.
What do you
You can make fun of Canadian all you want. Please do the accent. It's hilarious.
Wait, were you like born in Canada or like?
No, I have a lot of family in Canada. My grandparents emigrated from Sweden to here, to Canada, and then
It's like a little pit stop.
yeah.
How do you not know this stuff?
I don't know. We've never talked about that.
I've just never asked.
I'm glad I could bring some stuff
I
out.
mean, that's not a question. That's not
All
a
right.
question I
Is
asked.
anyone else
So,
reading?
here's what happens with SOAPSTone. So when you go to write about the book and analyze the book and come up with examples from the book, this isn't meant to be a stupid question, where are you going to look for that information?
In the book.
Oh, you're going to say Spark Notes.
Smart notes. I haven't checked smart notes since then.
Book is a good place to find all that stuff. And certainly you are going to be finding your examples from the book and whatnot. What SOAPSTone kind of forces you to do, though, is to look at things beyond the book. It's looking at the context of the book as well. And that's where we're talking about who's the speaker of the book, what is the occasion of the book, what is the intended audience of the book, because all of those things help to better understand what is the argument. If you were to take The Catcher in the Rye, book we'll be reading probably come like end of September or beginning of October. If you look at the intended audience as teenagers or versus looking at the intended audience as adults, you get two different arguments going on because there's going to be probably a different message geared towards an adolescent teenage audience than you would have towards a middle-aged audience. And so what this forces you to do is kind of think about what is the author trying to accomplish. In a lot of ways, and I know we're doing this as the last one, in a lot of ways, SOAPSTOne's a good first thing to do before you start looking at Diddles and Spa, because now it kind of gets you into the frame of mind as to what's going on. The nice thing about most of the texts that we read for this perspective, although not including Heart of Darkness on Monday, most of the books tend to be American literature, The good news is, when it comes to the context, the background, you kind of know what's going on. You had an idea what's happening in the Dust Bowl in the 1930s before reading the book. If we were to talk about War of the Roses in England, in the 16th century, that's going to be a little bit different because that's not going to be at the forefront of everyone's mind. Maybe it is. Can't think of any Canadian literature off the top of my head that.
What about Polish?
Joseph Conrad's from Poland.
I'm very Polish.
There you go. All right. Well, you'll be good with him.
Great.
He knows Polish and he knows French and Russian and English and a
I
whole bunch
don't
of
know
stuff.
all of it.
So, who is the speaker of the Grapes of Wrath?
The bear. The president.
Well, yeah, that would kind of depend on the chapter. So, if you were going to sum up like who is the best speaker for the book as a whole, well, we don't want to write that. Why?
It's fiction.
Because you said not to write that. Well, and generally the speaker would be the author. Okay, so if The Catcher in the Rye does have a first-person narrator, the narrator is not going to be the speaker. It's still going to be Salander, who is the author. The problem is Steinbeck doesn't really mean anything. I mean, you know who Steinbeck is because you read the Burl. But if I were to say Joseph Conrad for Heart of Darkness, chances are none of you are going to go, oh, that guy. I remember him. He was born in 1857 in Poland, and be able to kind of go through the litany of his career. So what you want to do are come up with abstract terms to describe the speaker, so give us a better context of what's going on. Can you think of any abstract ideas that would describe Steinbeck?
That's abstract.
Could you say,
Thinking outside the box.
could you say it's from a view of someone that was living in that time period?
Sure. And what trying to think of a way to kind of phrase. I don't want to like put words in your mouth with it. He's contemporary of what's going on. How does he feel about what's going on plot wise, like within the book?
He's anti-capitalist.
This book was written by Steinbeck. This book was written by an anti-capitalist. By going, this book was written by an anti-capitalist, now that kind of starts to mean something as you start to look through it, Or you could go for like at least someone who could have socialist support. Thinking of we already have an A term. Thinking of like another A term, more general than like anti-capitalist, but he's kind of sticking up for the little guy. You got the haves, the have-nots. If you are trying to get support for a group of people, especially a group of people who are being persecuted, we tend to say you are an advocate, activist. What was yours?
I said ally.
Ally, yeah. Anyone know anything else about Steinbeck?
Oh wait.
Wasn't he in jail at some point? Was it someone else?
He probably was. I can't think of it off the top of my head.
Why was he
I read that
probably
somewhere.
in jail? He's a weird guy. What would he have been doing?
I don't know, I read that somewhere.
Being a socialist in the 40s.
That's true.
He was called. Sorry to cut you off, Maria. Red Scare, 1950s.
Yeah.
You have a lot of authors and writers and screenwriters and directors in Hollywood who are getting blacklisted under McCarthyism for socialist or communist sympathies. Allegedly. And again, it was like a witch hunt, like Ben's a communist, and that Ben, and them. Steinbeck went before the House committee and said, "You can't do this. You people are nuts." So he was very much an activist. He did not go to jail. He was charged with contempt, but never had to serve jail time for it. But yeah, he was in contempt of the Senate, which is pretty impressive.
He was born and raised in California, so he culture.
Which that surprises some people, because California, based on his depiction, doesn't come off as being such a great place. So some folks would think, oh, he must be from the East Coast. There's no way he would be from California. But yeah, he's writing about his home state. He's from California. He went to Stanford. Then he comes out east to New York in 1925 is when he first comes over.
That was my question. Like, how old was he whenever?
He's book gets published in 39. He's born 1902, so he'd be 37. Grapes of Wrath is considered the third. It's not a trilogy, you know, like Lord of the Rings or a series of books with, Harry Potter or whatnot. 1936, Tortilla Flat. It's about California ranchers. Then you have Mice of Men, 1937, I think. And then 1939 is the third installment of like his Western migrant kind of California life. So it's something that he writes about quite a bit, and California tends to be where most of his stuff is. The Pearl's written later. Pearl comes out in 46 is in my head for some reason. I might not be completely right with that. Anyone know what he did before he was an author?
He surfed in a wheel, right? No, am I still thinking of
No,
the person?
you're thinking Hemingway.
Yeah, you're right. Okay.
Old Man of the Sea.
It's
Way to go, Santiago.
Oh, I needed that though.
Before he was an author, he was always still a writer, but he was a newspaper reporter. He struggled with being a newspaper reporter because he had a hard time being objective in his writing. He tends to be subjective. So he became an author and write about whatever he wants. But again, I know this is still not like a whole bunch of, wow, I didn't know all this stuff. But again, to say that you have an anti-capitalist from California who advocates for the little guy means more than saying, oh, you're going to read a book by John Steinbeck. So the more abstract qualities you can come up with, the better idea you start to get as to what the overall purpose could end up being. Maria, you said an advocate. We can kind of play on words. We could say advocate, meaning a noun. We could make that a verb, and all of a sudden it becomes advocate, which would be a pretty legitimate purpose for what he does throughout the course of his book. So this starts to give you more ideas about purpose and subject matter down here. Occasion, well, the book gets published in 1939. We know we are kind of like at that end of Depression era. We certainly don't know that World War II is going to be in full swing here from the U.S. involvement, although it is in Europe at that point in 1939. But we certainly kind of have now an idea of, all right, we have people who are kind of starting to come out of this economic downfall, but we still have to take a look at issues that were happening in different parts of the country, you know, especially if you were out east, you wouldn't be aware of what was happening in the west. We think of western part of the United States, and you know, you got a map right back there you can take a look at. Oklahoma's right above Texas. California's a big state, especially though 1940s, 1950s, where is the vast majority of the U.S. population? East Coast. East Coast. Once you get past Chicago, you're in no man's land. So even though you're talking about a large portion of the country, California may as well be, you know, Singapore if you're living in Pittsburgh. Why would I go there? That's way far away from, it's like being in Canada. It's like nothing. So this is still kind of unveiling some stuff to people who would be unaware of it. Audience, who's he writing to? Who would Steinbeck's intended audience be? No, not AP Junior students. It's like the stretch hand raise. I'll let you figure out what you're doing then.
Victims of the depression.
Okay, could be victims. For support.
Fellow socialist sympathizers.
Lord?
People that are like in the middle or lower classes.
Kind of like on the, like, in the middle just so far as like money, like middle class or,
Yeah.
okay. And you could also have kind of people who are on the middle of the fence, maybe like kind of politically, you know, when it comes to some things. To talk about socialism and all this stuff still is not going to be very popular in the 1930s, and there were a lot of critics who were like, this is so un-American of a book. It should, you know, not burn the copies necessarily, but it's not something that should really be promoted.
Maybe he wrote it so all the wealthy people would see what they were doing.
So could be to the wealthy class as well as more of like an eye-opening experience.
Share that the government, anyone before.
Big business, big bang. You mentioning government. well, how can he be writing to all these people? Well, certainly he can be writing to all these people, and putting all of this is much better than writing the American public. Because now, knowing that purposes are verbs, if he is writing to victims of the Depression, what could be a purpose to the victims of the Depression? What could he be doing for the victims of the Depression?
Try and increase their living. I started that sentence on the board.
That's not a one-word verb.
I don't know.
Okay, honest answer. I like that.
Giving them a voice.
Okay, so, and again, this would go back to your term. He's advocating. For any of these, like, can you think of a specific purpose for the middle class or for the government, the wealthy?
Could be to draw attention to everything bad that was going on.
Which, like, is there a certain group that you would say, or?
You'd say that for all of them.
Okay.
Especially like the government and the wealthy.
And I'm not trying to take something that we were mentioning yesterday, but kind of like that revealing or unveiling, exposing kind of idea. Maybe just to have a different word. If you are unaware, you need to be educated about it. So, you know, if you're living in Pittsburgh and you don't know what's going on the West Coast, you might need to be educated about what's happening to people. Can you think of anything specifically for like the government or the wealthy? Go to the other end of the spectrum.
I feel like for the wealthy people, you could just be writing for your class. You could at the same time you might be speaking to both the victims of depression and the wealthy people by saying to the wealthy people this is what you're doing to them and that's not okay, and this is like from the point of view of one of these families. This is what the effects of your actions have, and then the people with depression be like, you're not alone in what happened to you.
I think it was fourth period. Instead of us saying the spread of socialist ideology for our argument for our SPAL, I think we just went with the unfair treatment of the migrants. And so it was still a lot of this kind of stuff. Well, actually, no, we were like saying expose, reveal about the unfair treatment. You also could do something when it comes, and this would certainly go along those ideas. When it comes to the government, when it comes to the wealthy, what are you doing? What's he kind of stating about their actions? He could be criticizing the way that they go about things. Another C word would be that he could, well, am I stealing it?
No, I had a different. I was going to say protest.
Protest, condemn, protest,
Say communicate.
communicate, sure. All of these are much better than show. Lauren?
I think you could try to show some empathy, like put yourself in their position.
Sure, empathize. I'm going to put empathize/sympathize. You know the difference between empathy and sympathy?
Sympathy is feeling bad for something that you haven't experienced, and empathy is understanding what that coming about.
Right. So if you have empathy, you've been there before. I know what you're going through. You know, I'm there with you, Zach. Sympathy, oh, that sucks. Can't imagine what that's like. You have my sympathies. One of the things that he did, well, actually, if you that the diction page. I already skipped it.
I don't know if it's in this copy, because there's another one that I have.
I wonder if yours
I
has
don't
it.
think it's in the useful copy.
That's not right. Oh, it's on the ISBN, like the copyright page and all that stuff. To Carol, who built it. Carol is his wife. Remember, what does she do?
Title.
What does he do?
Divorce.
Yeah. He should have gone to jail for that. To Tom, who lived it. Tom, Weed Patch is not a real place, the government camp, but it's based off a real, and Tom was the head person, Tom Collins was the head person for the government camp. Steinbeck went on the Route 66 trail, and to stay at all the places to kind of see what it was like. Is it truly empathy? No, but it's kind of as close as you can get, you know, without having to truly go through with it. So in some ways, yeah, he is trying to get people to certainly sympathize with what is happening, because this is as real of as authentic of an example as I certainly can do. subject matter, this is pretty much like the argument, that we're going through. So we're trying to advocate for better treatment, trying to educate maybe about socialistic ideology and things like that. We're trying to communicate about the horrific experiences of the migrant people. We are criticizing the wealthy's unfair treatment of the migrant people. But going through the SOAPSTone, like this kind of starts to get you ready for a spa. So by the time you run through this whole thing, so subject is obviously what is it that you're trying to accomplish. Tone, critical, angry, upset, that kind of stuff. That helps with that overall attitude. If you go through a SOAPSTone as a brainstorm, now it gives you ideas for more specific arguments, more specific purposes that you can probably then start to use for a thesis statement.
What's the difference between purpose and subject?
Purpose is going to be the verb. Subject is going to be the purpose about whatever. So, well, I always wondered what that sounded like. It's kind of like having the argument within your spa.
Okay.
They didn't want to talk to me. So literally, this would be the subject matter. And just like these, it could be a whole bunch of different things depending who that audience is, which purpose you're starting to go with for it. And then tone, we know, is going to be overall attitude. But the idea is it kind of gets you in the frame of mind as to what an author is trying to do, makes you better educated about it, and it makes you kind of think about historically what's going on. On Monday, I pass out Heart of Darkness. Why do we go through Conrad's life story a little bit? Why do we go through, we're going to be in Africa in the late 1890s, imperialism is going on at that point. Well, that's important for understanding the context of what's happening within the book, as opposed to, here you go, have fun, read it. So when we spend time talking about a writer, that helps you kind of figure out, all right, what are going to be the purpose, what's going to be the arguments, what's going to be the subject matter. It doesn't give it to you, but at least kind of gets you in the right frame of mind. All right. So diddles, spa, soapstone. We use those things all year long. You remember those three things, you'd be in pretty good shape. Is that a thumbs up or a
There's a question. Sorry. Do we have any homework this weekend besides our essays? Or if we want to do?
You mean like if I want to have homework or if you want to start your
If
essay?
I want to start, I want to start.
I think you should, so that, no, that's your homework assignment. In no particular order, what would be some diddles for chapter 5? So like what would be examples of imagery that come to mind, or figurative language, or whatever. But I want to be able to pull some examples so that we can kind of start to think about, okay, that's what we mean when we say details or syntax, that kind of stuff from here, and then you can apply it to other stuff.
It's the extended metaphor of the thing.
Okay? Ben, I would agree that it's an extended metaphor. Can you explain the difference between like a metaphor, extended metaphor versus symbol? Or did you just guess right?
A symbol is more like it represents something. The metaphor is more like a comparison.
Okay. So it's an extended metaphor.
Metaphor that continues for a long period of time.
So like single metaphor, it happens. Extended metaphor, you keep coming back to it multiple times. And certainly within the context of the chapter, that happens with the bank. I would agree the bank's an extended metaphor. Symbol, something is what it is, but then it also represents something else.
Yeah.
Not in chapter 5. A perfect example of a symbol would be the turtle.
Oh, that's right.
And you're like, why am I reading about a stupid turtle crossing the road?
Yeah, that was fun.
Did you guys talk about that? Is this way in different class period?
Probably.
Represented the
Yeah,
Jews.
someone told me.
What?
Represented the Jews.
Yeah.
How do you know it did?
Well, I didn't at the time, I know it now,
Why?
because Ben just told me.
But yeah, but you said I know.
Well, no, I kind of like figured it out throughout the book what it ended up representing,
Why does it represent the Jews?
because the turtle was trying to cross the road, and it was an constant uphill battle trying to get to the other side, and then
What's on the back of a turtle? What are the Jodes driving?
Car.
What's in a jalopy? A car. What's on the back of the jalopy?
People in a show?
Essentially, their
Lives.
home. What's the shell?
Oh, it's on the turtle.
Home. Remember the nails of the turtle?
They were, it was,
They're
yeah,
yellow.
everything was, and Jode's, or Tom Jode's, like, all his outfit and his shoes, yeah, were yellow.
What tries to destroy the turtle?
Car.
Machines. What destroys the homes in chapter 5? The tractor, the mechanized man with the goggles and all that kind of stuff. So the turtle does become symbolic of the Jodes. I wasn't trying to put Anna on the spot. Why? If someone were to write about symbolism, a lot of times, the turtle is symbolic of the Jodes, and then Ben puts a quote in about the turtle, and then moves on. In the margin, I put the 3-letter question, why? How do you know? Prove it. Well, by going through this is how the turtle aligns with the Jodes. Now you're explaining that symbol. So one of the big things when it comes to the explanation of your literary devices, not that Ben has to define what extended metaphor is. You can feel pretty confident that I know what extended metaphor is, but be able to explain how this is working to better advance the argument. All those parallels now between the turtle and the Jodes, that reinforces your argument. That gives you more credibility, more validity with it. So that would be something you want to keep an eye on.
This may be a silly question, but does Tom pick up that same turtle?
Never you don't know for sure, but I always kind of go with yes, because it's right after
Yeah.
that happens. And the turtle stays there. This turtle's still there in chapter 6, I think after chapter 5. And that, if you're looking at it as symbolism of equaling the Jodes, what better way to do it than to have Tom literally picking up the turtle? Not that he and the turtle are now one, but it strengthens, emphasizes the connection between those two.
Would it be an example of syntax if there is no quotation marks?
Yes.
Well, there are quotation marks when Tom Davis, or whatever his son, is talking to the family that he's destroying.
So
Yeah, but in the rest of it, when they're just the example of the random tenant.
Yeah, but why
Where there's
is
no quotation marks.
is
now
that
you're asking why.
I feel like it's a
like a
it's
specific
a
thing?
specific people talking, like, it's like there's names to
Yeah.
them.
Well,
I
that
feel like
that,
it keeps the tenant in the beginning kind of anonymous as it represents a lot of different people.
How would and the big thing and this isn't really a diddle, so to speak. It's more like a plot structure. You could have the Grapes of Wrath be about 2/3 of its length, and it would still work. If all the chapters were solely about the Jodes. You could read chapter 2, chapter 4, chapter 6, chapter 8, and you'd be able to understand 2/3 of what we're talking about. There's a chapter about a turtle. I skipped that one. If you didn't read the expository ones. Why do what he does? Why have these other ones?
It's strange. It's on what the Great Depression and the migrant movement was actually was.
Okay.
Can you show that it happens to everyone? Like, I feel like they're more generalized. It doesn't use it's like this is happening to everyone. And then it goes more specific.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty much what you're going along with as well. And I'm not ignoring Lauren and Anna, just saving time for other stuff we're going to get into as well. You could focus on one family and go, boy, that family had a rough time with it. But by having the other chapters, you're identifying that it's not necessarily a universal struggle, but it's certainly a greater struggle than what was just happening to the one family. The lack of quotation marks that I would say could go along with when the tenants, the landowners are coming down to the tenants and all that kind of stuff, is that it could become more of a universal conversation, which I think is what you guys were kind of starting to allude to, as opposed to a specific conversation between Farmer A and the Davis boy who's on the tractor, starting to plow over. So there's more of a universal conversation, a universal issue, a universal problem that is kind of taking place with it. And I think the lack of quotation marks identifies this isn't just a singular conversation that would be happening, but it's something that would be happening all over the place. chapter 7 is the one where you have the used car salesman. You don't have a whole lot of quotation marks in that one either, because that could be, again, a conversation that tends to happen again and again and again, not just at this used car sales place, but at other used car sales places as well. So yeah, that could be syntax. You have a lot of repetition in chapter 5. What are the men always doing? They're always squatting. They're always playing in the dirt with the sticks and stuff like that. You know, the repetition of that line over and over and over again, that's repetition. That would certainly count as syntax as well.
How come so and I forget what chapter it was, but it was right before, I think it was like the night before they were leaving, on their trip, and they
Like
had,
before they were like leaving from Uncle John's.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so they had like that like family meeting thing. It seems like they only did that once, but like they made it seem like they made it seem like it was really important, but like I thought like it was gonna be a reoccurring thing.
That the family would always kind of come together?
Yeah, and it just kind of seemed like that structure degraded.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
because it's like a representation of how the family.
Yeah.
Well, and you have a real shift too, and this could kind of be like, say your argument, like we said, spread of socialistic ideologies. Maybe you did something like the re-examination of family values or American values. So part of that could be political, part of that could be family. Who's in charge of the family? Mom. It's not a patriarch, it's a matriarch. And so that could be part of that re-examination where prior to this, you know, it's a male's world, you know. Part of that shift, part of that re-examination could be that you take a look at Ma's increased importance throughout the course of the book. That, you know, Uncle John certainly broken based on events that have happened. And even like Rosa Sharon at the end, you know, you have female giving life to male. And so that's a shift in American values in the 1930s. So I think that's part of it where it puts more importance, more significance on Ma than it does as the unit. Now the unit is still important. You know, Ma wants to keep the family together. Obviously that doesn't happen, you know, based as people start leaving and things of that. But she's the one who is in charge.
Yeah.
You know, that's my role. I'll hit you with a lug wrench if you try to do, or a tire iron if you try to do anything else. Diction. Any diction you can think of in chapter 5? Bless you.
I think he kind of has the big word, but like an angry diction, because the way he compares, he kind of compares everything to something bad, like or something mean.
Yeah, and I would say page 49, the first paragraph, is a really good example of this. It's obviously not a word with positive connotation, but it's a very good example of the impact that a single word can have. It's in the first paragraph, it's on page 49, it shows up twice. Like first paragraph to paragraph, it's already started on page 48.
I mean, it says that like it has like iron teeth and it's like
Yeah.
raping the
Okay.
around the ugly
Okay, so what's the word?
raping.
Yep. You said angry diction. Angry would work. Could say violent. Could be predatory. You know, would be a word. But the reason I wanted to mention this one is you can see the impact that that one word has. You could put in a bunch of different other words instead of raping, and the paragraph would still make sense. It would still fit within the context of what's happening within the book. But by him using the word raping, he basically ups the ante, you know, to a whole other level with it. So that's a good example of how you're looking for words that have significant impact just based on their presence there. The iron teeth could certainly be imagery. There's a lot of mechanical imagery. The tractor driver is described basically as being a robot. There's a lot of details. How much money does the tractor driver get?
$3 a day.
$3 a day. That's a detail. The amount of acreage the land has. That's certainly details. He's going to use that money to buy. Those are details. So those would be types of things that would kind of fit in there as well.
Mr. Kane.
I would, as Sam was asking, over the weekend, I would try to start working on this. Get yourself going with it. Then, if you're having issues, we can certainly touch on those things before a rough draft on Thursday.
I feel like going into class, like if we were gonna do this, I don't know, like whenever we went over the essays, I was thinking about actually using this like socialistic